Hello.
Hi. So I'm Lori, and
Nice,
this is
Hi, and I'm Dylan.
nice to meet you.
and thank you so much for talking with us today. We have Barry Jackson, the amazing artist behind some of the original work for Shrek, which you may have seen a clip of recently, some of the original Shrek test footage.
Mhm.
So, Barry, would you tell us a little bit about what you did on the original Shrek movie?
Well, I'll tell you, at that time, and I guess we're talking about I want to say 1994, a group of us who worked at DreamWorks were brought into a like a certain segment of the building, and were told about this book that William Steig had written called Shrek, and it was a children's story about an ogre who is actually, if you read the book, a pretty obnoxious individual who ends up living happily ever after with a really obnoxious type of ogress, you might say. And they wanted to make a CG movie out of this book. So the question was, well, what does the movie look like? And I was actually hired as the initial production designer. And so the instruction that we got was that DreamWorks was imagining a dark and edgy movie and was also going to be a low budget movie. And we began, there was probably about 20 of us. And this was a time when nobody knew very much about CG animation. So there was the question of what it looks like, and then the question of how you would make the movie. So really, we were feeling our way in the dark in a sense. But I know I worked with an artist named Mike Plug, a pretty well known comic book artist, to come up with the way the character looked. And he and I both I think he drew the initial sketch that was approved. I later did color renderings of it and refinements of it, and then we had a very good sculptor make a maquette of it, and that was then approved to be Shrek. And so then the environments, it was now about the environments, and there were a group of artists that worked on it, and but I more or less headed up the way uh, this particular movie was going to look. But at this point, what they really wanted to see was a test. So it was like, well, we're not going to go right into production. We'd like to see a test and see if you guys even understand 3D at all. So there was just a real interesting process. I was quite adept at Photoshop at the time, so I did a lot of artwork. And the concept of the test was that Shrek was going to walk down a dark medieval alley and be confronted by a mugger whom he'd be able to get rid of right like that. And we'd just get some insight into the kind of character Shrek was. So that was the story we were telling. So as a result, I created a number of medieval dark alleys from all different directions, and medieval castles and medieval gateways and things like this to set up the mugging. That was really what my initial intention was. And we understood Chris Farley was going to be the voice of Shrek. So Shrek was going to be probably a broader comical character than he ended up being. He was going to be a little bit like a bull in a china shop. And I think the test reflects that, actually. If you watch, you can see that's a broader comical character. That's a real nutball kind of character. So we succeeded in doing that. And for animating it, we used motion capture to capture the walk and momentum and the dance and all that. And then for the actual facial animation, we used a variety of sculptures, actually sculpted. And those sculptures were morphed in the computer to look seamless. And really, if you look at him talking to the mugger, and so it's actually quite effective. And I might even say, I think more impressive than the facial animation Toy Story. It's pretty impressive for its time. 1995. There's a little soap opera that went on, and what basically happened was, I think at a certain point, the powers that be were concerned that this was getting a little too dark and edgy. So I think when they were looking at Shrek, they were kind of going, my God, can people really watch a character like that for 90 minutes in an animated film? I mean, perfectly practical concerns. And so I think, you know, I think personally, I think it would have been a lot of fun. But I think the concerns were, no, we've got to get a broader audience around this thing. And so Shrek would need to be redesigned. But there's a problem in that I think those decisions were realized once we were way down the pipeline with this short film about Shrek getting mugged in the alley. And as anybody in CG knows, is once you get pretty far down the pipeline, the ship has sailed. And to redesign Shrek and bring him back and make him walking through a lovely park is a whole other concept completely, and you'd have to scrap everything you did, and then people would be upset about the wasted money. And we elected to go forward with the test and thought, well, let's take a look at it and see what it is. But I was disappointed that I didn't get to be in at the very end and approve the final renders or anything like that. They had begun making personnel changes and moving it towards a much softer looking film, in which case I lost my job along with at least 20 other people. And but I maintain that the way that test looks is not as good as the art that I did for the test, which I think was much more precise and much more well lit and much more well composed. So I would have liked to have been there longer to ensure a more effective test. But that is the story of the test. That's kind of what happened. So after the test, though, I think what happened is the powers there realized what they wanted, and they were realizing, you know, this Shrek thing is really more of a romantic story. And they're sort of thinking, you know, I just don't think anybody's going to fall in love with that creepy thing that Barry and Mike Klug did. So they then started thinking differently, and they started thinking differently about, you know, what does it look like, and all those sorts of things began to arise. And there was pushback. I mean, you know, the original crew liked the look. You know, we kind of wanted this dark, edgy, low-budget film, but I think, and this may be very wisely so, that the people at the top realized that maybe Shrek could do very well with a broad audience if we soften it up and make it look prettier and nicer. Maybe we could get all of America to fall in love with Shrek. Looks like that's what happened, isn't it? So I certainly can't fault anybody for the decisions that they made. So actually, I have to say, those were some pretty shrewd decisions, some pretty insightful ones. We'll never know what the dark, edgy, low-budget film would have done, though. Although I sometimes lay awake at night wonder. Yeah, I would say we were a little bit. It sounds a little cruel, but in a sense, we were a little bit the initial guinea pigs that went out to explore Shrek and come up with something. And personally, I think we came up with what we were told to come up with. And I would love to see something like that done in animation, where we actually do a stranger, darker, weirder movie. I think would be a neat thing. It may be a good time to do that now.
Wow. Well, that was incredibly insightful. Dylan, do you have any questions to cap this off?
Not specifically.
Well, I just want you to know that this all took 30 years, all happened 30 years ago, long before CG is and was what it is today. And I didn't even know I had the Shrek test. And I was rooting around in an old hard drive, and I saw this old QuickTime movie that I was able to convert, and put it out there. And I've seen other copies of it on YouTube, but they probably aren't as nice as this particular copy. So I elected to let the world see it.
I think the world thanks you for this nightmare.
I think the whole world will be very thrilled to have their nightmares fulfilled. So thank you.
I hope I don't keep anybody up at night.
Oh, I think you definitely will.
Okay. Thanks so much.